Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and to those of you present here this morning and those joining us online. I will now present CDB's economic review and outlook for our borrowing member countries and some policy options to help promote sustainable, inclusive growth over the medium term. The outline of this presentation is as follows. First, I will provide some brief remarks on the global economic review, as well as some brief remarks on the outlook for the global economy. Then, I will examine the regional economic performance and the predictions for the coming year. Then, towards the end of this presentation, I will provide you with some policies prescriptions for sustainable, inclusive growth. Global economic output expanded by 3.3% in 2014, the same pace as in 2013. Growth was largely driven by emerging and developing economies, especially in China and India, which expanded by 7.4% and 5.8% respectively. However, there were improvements in advanced economies as well. Growth in the US increased to 2.4% in 2014, up from 2.2% in 2013. With unemployment falling and inflation remaining low, in 2014, the euro area also returned to growth, albeit only at 0.8%. There was, however, mixed performance in the euro area, with Germany expanding by 1.5% during the course of the year, while Italy contracted by 0.4%. The future of the single currency and the fear of deflation still hang over the euro area, where unemployment is still sluggishly high. Inflationary pressures were eased by the more than 40% drop in the price of oil. Thus monetary policy remained loose, particularly in the US, where interest rates remain low, although their quantitative easing program was halted in October 2014. With respect to the global economic outlook in 2015, in 2015, we expect global growth to expand by 3.5%. This is slightly better than the estimate of the 3.3% in 2014. However, there are a number of risks for this forecast. First of these is geopolitical. In the Middle East, as Western allies tried to combat the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS as is commonly known, we expect there to be some turmoil, and that could be some implications there for the global economy. The tensions between Russia and the West with respect to Ukraine and the consequential squeeze on the Russian economy, that could also likely have an impact on global economic output. There's also the continuing standoff with North Korea and the risk to global growth associated with Ebola. Oil price uncertainty. There is some volatility in the market, and we are yet unclear what this lower oil price could mean for global production, particularly in high-cost areas. On a good note, the US economy is performing well, with unemployment falling, but the threat of higher interest rates as that economy nears its capacity looms over the global economic outlook. In the UK, a major trading partner for many of our borrowing member countries here in the Caribbean, there is an election, and it's due in May of this year. The level of austerity there will depend on which party has control of the parliament after the election. This, of course, will have implications for economic growth there and knock-on effects for our small, open economies in the Caribbean. And finally, we've all been hearing this in the news recently. We are currently witnessing the spectacle, of course, of, shall I say, Greeks bearing gifts in Europe, and we are unsure if there will be a Grexit from the euro area. Now I will turn my attention to the regional economic performance in 2014. Preliminary estimates indicate that the regional recovery continued in 2014, with growth estimated at 1.3%. This was lower than what was originally predicted due to the realization of two key downside risks to the outlook. The first was the risk of natural disasters and other weather-related challenges that notably materialized in the form of the December 2013 Christmas Eve drought. Additionally, drought conditions severely affected agriculture in various foreign member countries during the year. The other downside risk to transpire was the sharper than expected drop in prices of key commodities, which constrained performances among the region's main commodity exporters. Nevertheless, the latter remained the principal contributors to overall growth, owing to their generally greater weight in the regional economy. Whereas Guyana and Haiti led the region in 2013 in terms of the highest growth rates, in 2014, the fastest rates were estimated for St. Kitts and Nevis and the Turks and Caicos Islands, both small, highly tourism-dependent economies with very small regional weights. They each experienced accelerated growth of 4% or higher, based on the strengthening recovery in tourism and continued investment inflows for mainly tourism and real estate-related construction. Moderate gains of between 1% and 3% in similarly services-dependent Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, Grenada, and Montserrat were likewise linked to the general improvement in tourism, and for all except Grenada, construction. Relatively modest increases of just under 1% were estimated for Dominica and Jamaica, but these nevertheless represented improvements when compared with 2013. Now, although the regional economies grew in 2014, a comparison of the Caribbean Development Bank's borrowing member countries to other country groupings suggests that structural problems persist. BMCs performed less well than other small island developing states. The high elasticity of demand for leisure travel impacted tourism significantly in the downturn, and this revealed structural weaknesses in our economies that are dependent on tourism. This has also meant that the effects have been transmitted to the fiscal accounts. When we compare ourselves to other small island developing states, growth rates have lagged, and this suggests that size might not be the major explanatory factor. All in all, structural deficiencies in Caribbean economies, such as the cost of doing business, the cost of energy, and regulatory reform, need to be addressed if meaningful and sustainable growth is to be attained. Next, I'd like to turn my attention to the sectoral performance of our economies, with an emphasis here on tourism. In 2014, almost all regional destinations recorded increased visitor arrivals. Both regional and extra-regional source markets continued to recover due to improved airlift capacity and intensified marketing. Stayover arrivals increased across most of the destinations for which data was available. The high cost of regional travel remains a concern, though, and ongoing challenges in regional air carrier operations continue to weigh on outturn in destinations like Barbados and St. Vincent and the Grenadines that depend heavily on the regional market for their tourists. St. Vincent and the Grenadines was the only borrowing member countries reporting a decline, while most other destinations reported higher growth in arrivals than in 2013. Let me just say something briefly about cruise ship passenger arrivals. Data on cruise passenger arrivals also provided supporting evidence of a strengthened recovery in tourism activity in the region, with most destinations reporting significant improvements in 2014, with the noteworthy exceptions being Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now, not all of our economies are tourism-based, and some are actually heavily dependent on commodities. Let me just say something about commodity prices and what this has meant for some of our commodity-based economies. Declines in international commodity prices in 2014 led to lower mining and quarrying output among the main producers. Continued declines in petroleum extraction were estimated for Belize, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago, reflecting ongoing reserve depletion in the first two and continued maintenance in the latter, in addition to the general impact of the sharp drop in oil prices. Bauxite production continued to decline in both Guyana and Suriname, while growth in alumina output in Jamaica slowed, as lower prices signaled reduced global demand. Gold mining output was also estimated to have fallen in Guyana and Suriname, notwithstanding continued direct investment in the sector, as prices fell further. However, the general uptrend in construction boosted demand for quarrying outputs such as sand, stone, and aggregate, resulting in growth in mining and quarrying in several smaller borrowing member countries, including Anguilla, Dominica, Montserrat, and St. Kitts and Nevis. I would now like to turn my attention to the fiscal performance of our borrowing member countries. Structural problems and the effects of the Great Recession have led to deteriorating fiscal accounts, with deterioration in many of the 9 most heavily indebted borrowing member countries, whereas 3 saw marked improvements. Homegrown adjustment programs supported by development partners, including the CDB, have led to improvements in Jamaica, Grenada, and St. Kitts and Nevis. We want to encourage these countries to continue along the path of fiscal consolidation and growth-enhancing reforms. It's particularly important that countries bring their level of indebtedness within sustainable levels, since if this is not achieved, debt will be a drag on growth in the future and will have a negative impact on the daily lives and well-being of the ordinary citizens. Therefore, the level of indebtedness and the level of the fiscal deficits in Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia are a concern. Of the lower indebted countries, the trends in Bahamas and Guyana need to be reversed. Let me say something about the levels of unemployment in many of our borrowing member countries. Over the course of the year, although there was an improvement in unemployment in some BMCs where data is available, unemployment remains stubbornly high within the region. The overall trend in Barbados and St. Lucia is a concern, and effort is required to reverse this trend. With over 1/4 of the labor force unemployed in St. Lucia, this poses a threat to future prosperity in that island. It's not all bad news, however, and the data suggests that the solution could be a regional one where we need to allow the movement of labor across borders. Some recent and anecdotal evidence suggests that the problem of youth unemployment is extremely significant. To this effect, the Caribbean Development Bank will publish a major study on youth unemployment in May of this year. In that study, we hope to provide policy prescriptions as to how we should tackle this problem that is lingering within the Caribbean. Next, I would like to say something about the ease of doing business within the Caribbean. At the Caribbean Development Bank, we realize that structural problems persist within many of our economies. And so there needs to be a structural change if we are to have increased levels of sustainable growth led by the private sector and to return the fiscal accounts to manageable levels. A sample of the latest Doing Business indicators taken from the World Bank's Doing Business report suggests that the region is lagging behind. When compared to the top-ranked economy, Singapore, The cost of starting a business is on average 37 times that of what it is in Singapore, here in our region. Our taxes on profits are 38% on average, while in Singapore, it is only 18%. And the cost to export a container is $460 in Singapore, and in the region, it is in excess of $1,000 on average. I should say that Jamaica has made real progress over the last year in improving its doing business environment. And we at the Caribbean Development Bank would encourage other countries to implement similar reforms. We need to make it less costly and more attractive to invest if we are to see a turnaround in economic fortunes. So let me now say something about the regional economic outlook and our forecast for 2015. In 2015, the Caribbean Development Bank is predicting regional growth of 2%. This is not stellar and will be led by growth in Guyana, Haiti, Suriname, and St. Kitts and Nevis. We expect modest growth in the remaining economies. The overall premise of these forecasts are improved economic performance of our major trading partners, as we expect more tourists to arrive, improved mining activity in the commodity producers, and increased construction activity, particularly led by the private sector, and investments in tourism-related activities. Finally, let me just provide you with some policy prescriptions which we at the Caribbean Development Bank think would be very useful for our policy makers to adhere to in order to promote sustainable, inclusive growth over the medium term. Many of our countries are too heavily indebted, and we encourage countries that are already doing so to stay the course on fiscal consolidation, and those that are not, to begin to do so. We encourage the enactment of fiscal rules to ensure that we build this into our governance. We need to also improve the efficiency of revenue collection and how we spend those revenues. The overall future performance of any economy will depend on its asset base, and so we encourage capital investment and reform. 2, we know that fiscal consolidation can be painful, so we advocate for sufficient social safety nets that protect the most vulnerable in society from any negative effects. Ultimately, as Sir Arthur Lewis indicated, the study of economics is a study of the conditions under which people live, and so for the Caribbean policymakers, this must be our primary focus. 3, energy security and the move towards sustainable and lower-cost energy is important. We must ensure that we have the correct regulatory environment to foster the uptake of renewables and encourage greater energy efficiency. 4, no economy can prosper without the right skills, and so investment in quality education is critical. Here, we would like to emphasize the so-called STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which will allow us to make greater use of technology in our production processes. 5, we think it's very important that we build in resilience into our economies. Therefore, it is critical that savings be increased within our region. Savings are critical to help foster investment. At the moment, with the exception of Trinidad and Tobago, regional rates of savings are too low. We would like to encourage governments to begin saving for the rainy day, to help weather economic challenges and save for posterity, and to also provide the climate for investment. We would suggest that any windfall revenues associated with economic programs, such as the exploitation of natural resources, we would encourage our governments to put aside these funds for posterity, or certainly for a rainy day. Now, 6. Now, with lower saving rates, it means that currently in the Caribbean, we need to attract investment from abroad and to encourage local entrepreneurs to invest. We need to improve the enabling environment for the private sector if this sector is to become the engine of growth. This is critical for structural transformation. With high public debt levels, the private sector will be relied on more and more to provide some of the public goods and services. And so we are seeing certainly a roadmap for public-private partnership arrangements, as those partnerships can become vehicles for transformation. 7. We saw previously that the levels of unemployment are still too high in many of our territories. Labor market flexibility and allowing labor to move freely across borders will likely improve the situation. 8. We would like to encourage the strengthening of institutions and greater transparency in decision-making. Improving overall governance is good for democracy and is also good for growth, since it will foster confidence in investors. And finally, the last policy prescription. We need to lower the cost of regional transport for both people and goods. We also need to make it easier to travel throughout the region. We did it in 2007 for the Cricket World Cup. We should be able to do it again. There is also magnificent potential for us to tap into global value chains if we can improve logistics within the region to take advantage of, for example, the expansion in the Panama Canal and the expected increase in global trade over the next few decades. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.